Now again, we're just going to pick up from where we left off last time. But today, like I said, we've got to try to do something else. Now, when we really first started this, I gave you guys that packet that had all sorts of different strengths and weaknesses. There's a particular strength that we have not addressed yet. But there's something you kind of have to keep in mind, because we've seen this before. We're going to see the Allies employ a strategy that's not going to work short term, but it can work very long term. And I mean very long term. What we're going to see today is, as the Brits are going to use an advantage they have, they want to use the Navy. Now, we have been talking before about how the Brits have the best Navy on Earth. They always do. They have for centuries. They want to use the best Navy on Earth to at least hopefully break the stalemate. They're going to use the Navy to set up the British blockade of the German coast. Now, have we seen the blockade used before?
Yes.
Where have we seen it before?
Civil War.
Civil War. During the Civil War, Lincoln and his commanders say, we have the best Navy between the two of us. Let's use that Navy to blockade the coast of the Confederacy. But even Lincoln said, I don't even think this war is going to last long enough for this plan to bear fruit.
Sure enough, it's what ended it.
It does bring it to an end, certainly. It's part of it, absolutely. Now let's kind of think about this war. Is this just dragging out?
Yes.
Yeah. This is a good idea that the Brits are going to use early on. But again, it takes time for it to bear fruit. Now, they have the best Navy in the world. Do you remember? This goes back to even like last unit. When the Brits are building and building, what are the Germans doing with their Navy? Building and building. Every time the Germans build one new battleship, the Brits build two. Then the Germans build another one, the Brits build two. They have the biggest battleships on Earth. I'm going to ask you to think way back. You have to remember, this particular class of battleship, the best in the world. Do you remember what they called it?
Destroyers.
No, not destroyers. It's a whole other class. I'll give you a hint. It starts with a D, and it's very British, or it means fear nothing. I'm not surprised. It was a small thing. These are all, that's good, but not quite. These are the dreadnoughts. The dreadnought class of battleships are enormous, by far the biggest in the world. When we were trying to build and keep up, we had battleships like this that were about, give or take, about a third the size of these things. These things are going to have 22 cannons on them that are so big they can lob a shell farther than the curvature of the Earth. They can launch a shell and have no idea where it goes. They can launch these things about 150 miles on a ship at sea.
How does that not push it back?
That's actually kind of a weird thing that the admirals talk about when these cans are getting bigger and bigger. They go, isn't that just going to push us over? And they basically came to an agreement where they said, I don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it didn't push them over. But I think it's an excellent thought, Cameron, because you go,
I mean,
we don't know.
It's getting lobbed at 150 miles. I mean, you'd think that it would have a little bit of pushback.
The power on it is just astounding. They have 22 of these cannons.
On one?
On one.
Oh, jeez.
Every time they just build more and more of them too. Here are the Germans trying to keep up, but the Brits aren't going to let them. They build and build and build. Now I say that because the Germans are going to invest in something else too. I'm going to explain what the Germans invest in as well, and we're going to talk about how this is a really wise choice. But trying to compete against the British Navy is hard because they're the best in the world. These Brits are going to set up these massive battleships along this part of the German coast and also just right in through here just to cut off the Germans from any outside sources.
Just like the Civil War.
Just like the Civil War. But I do want to point this out. During the Civil War, we had to blockade the entire southern coast. This is what the Brits have to blockade. That's the only German access to the sea. There, and if you bottle them up here, there's nowhere to go.
I mean, can't they just do it up in... Or
That goes up into Russia.
So
Don't want to deal with that.
Yeah, so basically...
This is what the Brits are responsible for right
so
there.
that's
and
the
there.
only way that Germany has a way of getting out to sea.
Correct. Now there is something else about this that we got to look at. First off, this is a tiny amount of coastline compared to what we had to blockade during the Civil War. How does our blockade during the Civil War go? Is there success? Oh yeah, it's successful. It just takes a while. You think the best Navy on earth can handle that much?
Yeah.
They lock down Germany. They are literally eliminated from any imports coming in, as the British Navy will tell them, you can either turn around right now,
Or we blow you up.
or we will put you to the bottom of the sea. It's your choice. Now, like I said, it's a great idea. It should be done. But there's a bit of a problem. With all this going on, who's supplying the Germans?
Us.
The United
The United
States of America.
States is supplying them. Remember, when the war first started, we're neutral. And we tell both sides, if you want American weapons, we'll provide them for you. You just got to pay for them. This is what we do as a neutral nation. We supply both sides. The blockade, however, is going to change this little scenario. Now, here you have the British Navy meeting American suppliers who are coming into Germany and giving them that choice. You can try to supply Germany if you want, but we'll just sink you and put you at the bottom of the ocean. Now, let's kind of play this out here. Let's just pretend there's an American ship coming into Germany and the British sink that ship.
Now we're in war.
Is that bad news for the Brits?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bad news because then you get the Americans involved. Now, again, can the Brits let those American ships in?
No.
So here we have this kind of weird little scenario. You can't let those American ships in, but we certainly don't want to sink them. So we need a deal. Now, our relationship with the Brits at this point is good. They're probably our best allies around the world. Here you have the Brits saying, we don't want to sink you, but we will if we have to. So how about we just make an agreement? Just don't supply Germany. In fact, we will make up for the financial losses. We'll buy whatever weapons you were going to send to them. Do we really care who's buying the weapons?
No.
All we want is just to sell them. We have a deal in place. We won't run the blockade, and you guys just pick up the financial slack. You guys just buy the weapons that Germany was going to buy. Done. You got it. Now, this blockade is going to be in place for years. Without supplies coming in, we're going to see famine in Germany. Because during this time, you have to feed the army first, and civilians second. What that means is, the army gets fed, and whatever's left is going to be left over for the population. There's going to be what the Germans call, they kind of think back about this, and call it the turnip winter. I want to ask, have you ever had a turnip before?
Yeah.
It's basically like an onion, for the most part. They called the turnip winter because that's all they had. They called the turnip winter because years later, they wish they had the turnip winter. That's how bad it gets. Now, we're going to talk more about this going forward because in Germany, things start breaking down quickly as 750,000 people are going to starve to death. Now, I want to kind of put a pin in this a little bit because the Germans need an answer. They got to break the blockade somehow. But I need to ask, can they compete against the British Navy?
No.
Nope, outbuilt, outsupplied. Like I say though, there's something else they invest in. Something that they use that's a gamble, but it's a really good idea for them. the Germans invest in a pretty new technology of the submarines. Now, submarining is a dangerous thing because the way that a submarine works is it's built to withstand the pressure that the ocean puts upon it down to a certain level. If you get lower than that certain level, the pressure of the ocean starts to push on the hull of the submarine, and if you get real deep, it'll just crush it like a can. Being in a submarine is a real difficult place to be. I'll tell you this, my uncle was a submariner. Now, he was in the Navy back in 1960, so this is different. But he said, we were literally underwater for just 6 straight months. All you have is just the light, the luminescent light, and just knowing you're surrounded by water. It's kind of a psychological, it's hard to deal with. He said that after a few months, there were guys that just couldn't handle it. They just lost it. And they said, we got to do something about this. So they take them to the surface and basically drop them off on a ship. Now, he said it didn't happen that often, but he said it could happen fairly frequently. The mindset to be a submariner is something. Because I was telling you guys before, remember, when you were in the trenches on the front lines, do you remember how long is your lifespan, roughly?
29 days.
29 days. Submariners have 13. 13 days is the average lifespan for a submariner. Yes, ma'am.
What kind of class of submarine did he run?
U-boats.
He was not on the U-boats. He's not that.
That was rumor too.
I really don't remember.
Was it like the layout?
I don't remember. I don't even think he told me, to tell you the truth. I'm not certain. I'd have to ask him. These German U-boats are going to be titled very aptly. The U-boats is the German word for submarine. The German word for submarine is the Unterseeboot. Now I'll go ahead and ask you guys, what do you hear in that? The undersea boats. We nickname them the U-boats. Now, like I said, this technology is fairly new. It's not really well tested, but the U-boats the Germans make are actually constructed very well. The thing about it is, though, they are cramped, it's dark, it's not a good place in which to be, but they're highly effective because no one had ever used submarines on a scale like this before. These submarines are told, if they're going to blockade us, we're going to blockade them. Set up the U-boats around the British Isles.
Oh, that's a lot of those.
Any ship that comes to the British Isles,
Aluminum.
sink it. Now again, we got to think through this.
Yeah.
Who's supplying the Brits?
Americans.
We are. What happens if you sink American ships?
They're coming.
And we go to war. But can you let the Americans supply the Brits?
No. We're in that
Rock in a hard place. Here are the Germans using what they call their unrestricted submarine warfare, where they set up their own blockade around the British Isles and literally tell the Americans, if you come to the British Isles, we're going to sink you. Now, of course, you got to find them. So we're going to see odds. Odds of getting to the British Isles and avoiding the U-boats is about 65%. With that, we're going to see about 1/3 of the shipping that goes from the United States to the British Isles being sunk. Now, like I said, these things are pretty well constructed, but there's a site.
Hi, I need to call Gio. I need you to take your selfie kit with me. You're not in trouble, but I have to call you.
You got it. These submarines being fairly well constructed are hiding underneath the waves. If you're going from the United States to the British Isles, are you a little nervous that one of these submarines might be lurking?
Yes.
Absolutely. It's terrifying. Because the way they would do this is they would simply fire their torpedoes. If they hit the ship, they can see it. And then you get away. Now, I say this because there were some old kind of maritime rules, the way this would work.